Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's that time of year when the president's SONA seems to be coming up, and right at the time when the DA seems to be fielding a new candidate in the upcoming elections. Obviously, the new candidate being not John Steenhuisen, and that's obviously after John Steenhuisen stepped away from the position. Now, a number of really interesting things are actually starting to occur now that we're getting closer to the election cycle, and the ANC can kind of see the writing on the wall as to where it's going to go. The DA's got to start fighting for its own survival, and that means targeting ANC strongholds. So how's the ANC actually going to respond to this, specifically as they're in a coalition with the DA? All this and more, but before we get on to the main video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and help me on my journey to 200,000 subscribers. My last few videos have only been circulated through to you, the audience, and they're not seem to be being promoted on YouTube as a whole. So I'd really appreciate it if you could help this video circulate with friends and family and people that you know, because YouTube doesn't really seem to want to promote the actual work that I'm producing. Anyway, let's get on to the main video of today. Well, the first news story actually comes around Mangaung Metro, because apparently this is a stronghold for the ANC, and the DA has announced that they're going to compete for it. And the idea behind what the DA is doing is they're going to attempt to take this stronghold off the ANC to show that the ANC is weak. Now, it's important to understand that this metro is actually in Bloemfontein, and in the 2021 local elections, the ANC scored 50%, the DA scored 25%, and the EFF scored 11%. Now, the ANC does risk losing its outright majority in that metro, and to be honest, the reason for that is pretty much what's happening in the rest of the country, right? Lack of service delivery. The key issues that the area seems to be experiencing include pothole-riddled roads, crumbling infrastructure, inconsistent water supply, water shortages, poor refuse collection, and inconsistent electricity supply. Now, everything I just listed there could probably be Joburg, and you'd be like, yep, pretty much what we're experiencing. So anywhere the ANC governs, pretty much what they have. Now, the financial governance of that metro have also been problematic, with repeated audits being failed, poor financial management being found, and unauthorized expenditure. Again, this could be pretty much any ANC metro, and you'd be like, yep, sounds like what we're experiencing. Now, that specific metro is described as the worst run metro in the country, and residents have often complained of prolonged water interruptions. Not that dissimilar to what they're experiencing in Johannesburg right now. Now, the ANC mayor, well, they're not going to disappear, are they? They're not going to go, well, we failed. In fact, what they're actually doing is they're trying to get re-elected. And many are suggesting that the DA's chances of winning in that area are rather high. But you see, if the DA does pull it off and they do win there, it signals a significant blow to the ANC, specifically the ANC strongholds. And how will the ANC actually respond to that? Well, the reality is probably not very well, which is exactly why a political dispute is occurring now between the ANC and the DA. And this specifically comes over the restoration of the local foot and mouth disease vaccination production. So the question is, did John produce all the foot and mouth vaccinations, or was it the previous ANC government? Now, the Agricultural Minister, John Steenhuisen, has apparently overseen the handover of 12,900 doses of locally produced foot and mouth vaccines. Now, the DA's position is that the restart of the locally produced vaccines is a milestone that has been reached under the DA minister. But the ANC's position is that the vaccine revival resulted from long-term groundwork which began under the ANC's administration. Now, the timelines cited are pretty much all over the show. Apparently, ARC scientists work on vaccine development between 2010 and 2018. The vaccine was actually registered in 2023, and the first batch of 12,900 doses were produced before the DA took over the agricultural portfolio. Now, the ANC highlights that 600 million rand had been allocated in 2022 to modernize vaccine facilities so that we could produce our own locally made vaccines, but that structural failures had been identified due to mismanagement and inadequate control of the animal movement. So they couldn't actually administer this or produce the actual vaccines because of structural difficulties. You know what that means? Probably like the ANC just not doing their job. They have all these lofty ideals, but they are very bad at actually delivering on them. Now, with both sides wanting to actually take the win and say, well, look, the ANC delivered or the DA delivered, both sides are starting to get at each other's throats, with both sides wanting to get the brownie points for producing the vaccine. Now, this ultimately is leading to forms of tension within the GNU itself, and this comes after Premier, the Gauteng Premier, the most useless guy in the country, Panyaza Lesufi, stated that the GNU is effectively an ANC-led government. So it's his way of basically saying that any positives you get out of the GNU are really wins for the ANC. They're not really there for the GNU partners themselves. Now, the way that he describes it is he says that the GNU parties were invited by the ANC and that the ANC remains the largest party despite losing their majority in 2024. Now, he suggested that a resolution should be adopted by the ANC's National General Council that suggests that parties that do not align with ANC positions may be sidelined and potentially kicked out the GNU. Now, the reason for this is because the GNU is starting to cause fault lines between different parties, specifically around foreign policy and the international relations. This is obviously a reference through to the US debacles and the cases against Israel. Now, according to Banyaza, the actual disputes are with the DA and the Freedom Front Plus, and he highlights the issues that have recently occurred with the Israeli diplomat that was declared persona non grata, the Iran policy, the relationship with the United States, and the Venezuela intervention response, so our response to Trump's taking Maduro. Now, he says that all of those are positions that the ANC are very pro, so they're pro declaring all of the Israeli diplomats persona non grata, they like Iran, they don't want to work with the US, and they like Venezuela, whereas the DA and the Freedom Front Plus take a completely different approach. And so Panyaza says, well, we should just chuck them out because they want their narrative to be the dominant narrative going into the next local government election so that they can kind of claim to somehow still represent the voices of the majority, even though they don't. Now, you already know that the trade implications from the ANC's positions on things, their policy positions, has resulted in the 30% tariffs on South African imports. And the DA argues that the BEE policy contributes to trade friction and has resulted in the South African economy not growing. But many are noticing that the GNU's collapse is unlikely due to economic and investor risks, with both the ANC and the DA having their own incentives to maintain the coalition. But the problem remains that the two, as we get closer to the elections, will continue to have this form of fake infighting between each other to try gain political scores against each other so that they can basically electioneer. Now, you know where we're probably going to see that the most? Well, we're probably going to see it in the SONA. Now, remember that the SONA that Cyril comes up with every year, he usually says all these lofty bullshit ideas, but they are just that. They are lofty bullshit ideas. We never actually get anything even remotely resembling what his SONA should say. Now, the reality of the actual SONA that he should be giving, but he won't, should probably say something like this, like we probably should have the foot and mouth disease as being one of the major issues of his government, the economic growth, the fact that we have 40% unemployment, and we should have faster structural reforms so that we can actually get growth and investments in the country. Electricity supplies still needs reform because Eskom still needs to be unbundled and Eskom is still problematic, despite there not being currently load shedding. But that's also because baseload has reduced because a lot of people have gone onto solar. Now, there should also be reform on SAPs. This obviously comes after the criminal capture commissions, which are currently looking at the capture of SAPs. We should also be addressing the water crises that affect pretty much everywhere in the country. There's a day zero in Johannesburg. We already talked about the water issues in Bloemfontein. And let's not forget that there's an impending day zero even in Port Elizabeth. We should probably also talk about the operational independence of the MPA, because the MPA is frequently being criticized by international bodies such as the grey listing as not actually being adequate and never actually prosecutes anybody through to imprisonment. And this itself was one of the reasons that South Africa was grey-listed. And one of the remedial actions South Africa was told to address was, well, prosecutions for crimes, because no one gets prosecuted for crimes in South Africa. And finally, we should probably also talk about the SA ambassador to the US and how we attempt to remedy the situation or the relationship we have with the US. But instead of that, we're probably going to hear more about smart cities and new ICJ cases against Israel and other bullshit that really isn't going to make a slightest difference around the average South African. Probably going to hear about, I don't know, NHI, even though that's going to be stuck in course for the next gazillion years. And we probably, no doubt, going to hear all about how the ANC seems to think that it's already repaired the economy, even though it hasn't. We're probably going to hear lots about all the infrastructure spending that the government will do on all the different failing state-owned enterprises. Now, let's actually look as to what's actually happening and the bullshit that Ramaphosa will no doubt speak, and let's actually see what's really happening in the country. Well, at the moment, we're looking at growth forecasts, according to the SARB, of 1.4% for 2026 and around 1.9% for 2027. Now, growth in South Africa remains below global averages, and we have been promising reforms that would somehow get economic activity to be resumed in many key industries like mining, finance, property, mobile, data, and industrials. That's anybody who's actually manufacturing stuff. Don't forget that South Africa's actual manufacturing base has shrunk significantly thanks to the ANC. And a lot of the things that should have been done to fix this include power sector reform and freight rail reform, specifically sending freight rail to the private sector. These haven't happened. Instead, what we've actually had is we've had low-cost imports from places like Temu and Shine, and to be honest, a lot of online even gambling, because that's where people now seem to want to place their money. They're not spending their money on property and finances and what. They're basically spending the money on gambling online. And that in itself is one of the reasons that South Africa's growth rates are very low. Now, rather than hearing about all of the spending that we're going to spend in the public sector, what we should really be doing is addressing how we intend to stop low-cost imports, possibly tariffs from abroad. But the ANC is unlikely to table that position because it would probably irk some of their allies. Like, as you know, the ANC loves to kiss ass to places like China. Now, one of the things that we are no doubt going to hear all about is the improved record revenue collection, because according to the latest statistics, revenue collection has improved by 2.3 trillion rand in the last financial year. Now, you need to understand that the reason for this is because SARS actually started going to individuals and asking a lot of difficult questions and forcing the collection of cash. Now, what that actually resulted from was improved compliance and enforcement units and modernization of their IT system. So it wasn't that South Africa actually grew a tax base. We just started actually collecting tax that we never got before. Now, this improved tax compliance has led to the improved tax collection. That in itself has led to South Africa exiting the financial grey listing and also an S&P sovereign credit rating upgrade. In terms of that credit rating upgrade, it's important to understand that what occurred is that we went from junk status to nobody wants to invest here, it's not looking good, to junk status, it's looking a little bit more stable. So if you call that a credit rating upgrade, I suppose, okay, fair enough. The SARS have been able to collect more money, not due to an improvement in the economy, which Ramaphosa will no doubt suggest that we have, but SARS have done it because they've just basically asked for money they didn't ask for before. It's basically greater tax compliance, not that we grew more tax. It's important to understand that. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. What bullshit is Ramaphosa going to promise you, and what do you actually think of it? And more interesting, what do you think is going to happen between the ANC and the DA in terms of the dynamic between the two as they get closer to the municipal elections? Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time, bye.